Good morning. Welcome back to the Red Mic. Happy Monday and happy President's Day. Groot says hello. All right, let's jump right in, shall we? President's Day. Why don't we call it what it really is? Confirmation Bias Day. Let's start about how this holiday started and how it went sideways and where we are now. I was going to do this actually as a fun #Fun Friday, but since, President's Day fell on Monday, I figured it was better to do this today. Now, originally we celebrated George Washington's birthday because, let's face it, the founding of the country felt like a solid reason to mark the calendar. Then in February, we would celebrate Abraham Lincoln's birthday because thought that holding the Union together, ending slavery, well, even though technically he really didn't end slavery, there's a whole lot of history on that. Basically, the Emancipation Proclamation didn't end slavery anywhere except in Confederate places where the Union had taken over again. Anyway, I digress. And possible violations of the Constitution aside throughout the entire Civil War. But hey, winners write the history. So yes, Lincoln, you get a day too. But then Congress got involved. Woo, goody. Yay. It's always a good idea when Congress gets involved. In 1971, the Uniform Monday Holiday Act did what America does best with history and traditions, shoved it all together, moved it to Monday for convenience, and basically rebranded those two holidays into one catch-all President's Day. No more Washington's birthday, no more Lincoln's birthday, just all of them. Right? Which is how we ended up with a holiday that's less about civil reflection and more about, oh, I don't know, postal and banking holidays, mattress sales, car dealerships, and confused social media graphics that feature every president, whether we like it or not. And that's where the fun begins because President's Day now means everyone is required by calendar, if not by emotion, to acknowledge presidents that they cannot officially stand. That means that people on the right are now patriotically obligated to celebrate Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, and the architect of the so-called Great Society programs, Lyndon Baines Johnson. And I know I'm saying a bad thing in Austin by saying bad things about LBJ, but come on, let's face it. The expansion of federal power that happened under his watch continues to wreck the budget and our economy on a daily basis. Now, people on the left have to acknowledge Donald Trump, which is funny. They have to acknowledge Richard Nixon, which is also very funny. Although, here's an aside. Did you know that Richard Nixon actually was the first one to talk about nationalizing healthcare? Yeah, and you know who killed it? Teddy Kennedy. Yeah, look that up. That'll make your brain explode, right? And then, and then George W. Bush. They hated George W. during his presidency, and now they seem to love him in comparison because he's not Trump. He's like the anti-Trump on the right side of the ledger, and they seem to love him, which makes me laugh every time I see it happen. I mean, he and Mrs. Obama are buddies. It just cracks me up. Anyway, but none of this is unity. This is forced bipartisan acknowledgement. If we're really committing to all presidents, we should be honest that this holiday also sweeps in what historians widely agree was the worst run of presidential leadership in American history, and that's the mid-19th century sectional crisis that led up to the Civil War. I mean, that era alone accounts for a shocking number of bottom tier presidents, like John Tyler. He was a member of the Southern planter aristocracy. He was a strong supporter of slavery. He was a Jeffersonian Republican Democrat by outlook. He opposed the National Bank, which aligned him not only with Andrew Jackson's earlier crusade, but also the roots of that in Thomas Jefferson. And he carried that hostility into the presidency, and he governed largely in opposition to his own party. He alienated nearly everybody, and he left office having effectively being disowned by his party. Historians routinely rank him near the bottom and not by accident. And after he left the U.S. presidency, he was elected to the Confederate House of Representatives, but he died before he took office. Then there's Millard Fillmore. Now, he only became president because Zach Taylor died in office. Fillmore supported the Compromise of 1850, the Fugitive Slave Act, and that, of course, that inflamed sectional resentment rather than easing it. Yes, his presidency delayed open war, but it did so by postponing the reckoning, not by resolving any of the underlying causes. Let's move to Franklin Pierce. He managed to make things worse. He viewed abolitionism as a threat to national unity, not as a response to moral evil, which it was. It was a response to moral evil. His administration was riddled with cronyism. Key positions were handed out to friends and loyalists, whether or not they were competent at all. He signed the Kansas-Nebraska Act in 1854, which repealed the Missouri Compromise and led directly to conflict in the territories. Look up Bleeding Kansas if you don't know what I'm talking about, which that was just a dry run for the Civil War. Pierce routinely lands in historians' bottom 5, and he should. Now, if Pierce laid the kindling, then James Buchanan sat and watched it spread and didn't try to stop it at all. Buchanan condemned slavery as morally wrong, but he backed arrangements that expanded it westward. When secession was looming on the horizon, he adopted a rigid interpretation of the Constitution and concluded, astonishingly, that he had no authority to act. So he didn't. And as the nation fractured, the president remained passive. Buchanan is almost universally ranked bottom 2, often dead last. Then last but not least of these really bad presidents, Andrew Johnson after Lincoln. He can only be described in what would be called a case study of failed leadership. He rejected Reconstruction policies designed to protect the newly freed slaves. He opposed the 14th Amendment granting them citizenship. He issued sweeping pardons to ex-Confederates, fired Lincoln's Secretary of War, Edwin Stanton, in violation of the Tenure of Office Act, which was probably unconstitutional, but that's another story from another day. Now, that actually led to his impeachment. He was the first president in U.S. history to be impeached. And no, he was not removed from office. Impeachment does not mean you're removed from office. Recent history should tell you that. He survived removal by a single vote in the Senate, but he remains a fixture near the bottom of presidential rankings. Bottom line for the 19th century, mid-19th century was exceptionally bad era for presidential leadership. Tyler, Taylor, Fillmore, they all usually fall in the bottom 10. Pierce is bottom 5, Buchanan's bottom 2, Johnson, yeah, he speaks for himself. Now, here are some of my personal favorites, because President's Day also should remind us that American leadership never fits neatly into modern party labels. Calvin Coolidge, fiscally probably the most conservative, probably more of a libertarian, honestly, because he didn't want to spend money on anything. He was admired for budgetary restraint, limited government, and the radical idea that Washington doesn't need to comment on everything or spend money on much of anything. Theodore Roosevelt, audacity in human form. He was a nationalist, trust buster, a conservationist, and a force of nature. I mean, the man was shot point blank range and survived with broken ribs and continued his speech. I mean, honestly, if you look at Theodore Roosevelt and Teddy Roosevelt, that's the Trump beta test. Today, he'd almost certainly be called a liberal, but I think that says more about modern labels than it does about Teddy Roosevelt. Harry S. Truman, the West Wing was right. Truman in the 2000s would have been called a Republican because conservatism once meant responsibility, limits, and resolve. Harry Truman was steel-spined. The buck stopped there. He was decisive when it mattered. His decision to drop the 2 nuclear bombs at the end of World War II, yes, they were horrible things, but saved millions and millions of lives. So, long story short, happy President's Day, the one holiday where you have to acknowledge somebody you dislike. You just do. History honestly refuses to cooperate with modern narratives. And the calendar quietly reminds us that, well, leadership is complicated, it's human, and never as clean as social media wants it to be. And that's today's Red Mike message. Hope you found it interesting or helpful. Hope you don't mind me putting on my professor's hat a little bit today and doing a little bit of a history lesson, but topics like this always excite me. I tell you what, later in the week, I'm going to talk about a guy who didn't become president, who was one vote shy in the electoral college and then somehow didn't end up winning. And in fact, my hometown still has a road dedicated to this very same guy. And I bet if you went through the South, a lot of places in the South probably have roads named after him as well. More about that tomorrow. I love you guys. I'll see you next time. And until next time, don't forget, as always, life is short. Drink the bourbon.